A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. When did your "something is very wrong here" feeling turned out to be true? Adding TLDR, gut instinct felt something was off when I saw two men helping another man. Turns out he was dead and they were just ditching his body. A few years ago, about 1 a.m. Sunday morning, I had to take my dog out before bed. I live in a rough neighborhood and I am a female, so I usually have my guard up regardless of the time. Before I left the apt building, my gut told me something was up. The street was completely void of traffic and people except for a van parked out to the side of the road. Outside of it were three people whom I quickly identified as male. Right away my reaction is to keep my head low, put my jacket hood up and not bring attention to myself. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see they were struggling. On closer inspection I see two of the men are holding up the other man between them. I make the assumption that they are headed home after a night of heavy partying and they are just helping their friend get sick or something. I am telling myself this to ease my fears. Then they notice me and they stop everything and freeze. I thought that was odd and no good, so I drag my dog straight back to my building. I don't even know if he got the chance to pee that night. I go to bed and thinking nothing more of it, until it's time to take the dog out again in the morning. There was a notice in the elevator asking for witnesses as to exactly what I saw that evening because a dead body had been found. So, this wasn't a friend of theirs after all. They were ditching a body. Still upsets me today, and I will never ignore my intuition again. Not my story, but pretty classic Reddit, so I'm reposting it here. Originally posted by /u/Rubingham in this thread, 5 years ago. It was near Halloween time when my friends and I were telling ghost stories. My friend said she was going to tell a story about her parents' first date. She said she didn't like telling the story, since it was actually true, but we prodded her on. To cut to the chase, the parents had spent a nice, if awkward first date, and around the time that they would have said good night, the male in the situation, my friend's dad, suggested that they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He apparently knew the place, since he had done a fair amount of rock climbing in the area. So the two drove up the mouth of the canyon, got out of their cars and started hiking under just the light of the stars, since it was a new moon. At some point, the male starts getting a bad feeling, since the pathway ahead, which would pass under some trees, would be dark, and because it was getting to be quite late. He ignores the feeling and presses on. In later rehearsings of the story, the female would say that she had felt the same feeling at what was probably the same time, though she didn't know the trail like he did. A minute later, the feeling came back to the male. He ignored it again, and started walking a bit of the way into the trees when his foot hit something soft in the middle of the path. Under the trees, it was too dark to see just what this soft thing was, and the feeling came back stronger than ever. Instead of finding out what his foot had bumped into, he and the female both agreed to hightail it out of there. Years later, after being married for some time, they were watching an interview with the serial killer, Ted Bundy. In response to a question asking him to describe the time that he felt the closest to being caught, he explained about the night that he lured a girl into Provo Canyon, and had just killed her when he heard some people coming up the trail. He explained how he hid in the trees just in time, only to watch some guy walk right into the body, and for some reason, just turn around and walk away. TLDR. Friend's parents stumbled onto a fresh corpse left by Ted Bundy on their first date. I grew up in a fairly quiet neighborhood, and when I was 12, we got our first dog. It was my job to take him for a walk every evening after dinner. This dog was the goofiest, sweetest golden retriever mix, not a mean bone in his body. He never met a stranger, and when he would occasionally escape, we usually found him in a neighbor's yard, playing with some kids. He was the farthest thing from a guard dog you can imagine. So I'm walking him one night after dinner, by myself, and he suddenly stops dead in his tracks in the very middle of the sidewalk. Out of the trees lining the neighborhood, maybe 10 feet away from me, this guy just comes strolling on out. I was pretty skittish at that age, and I didn't like being alone with strange men, at all, so I was immediately unnerved. The guy walked up to me and asked if my dog was friendly. I responded out of sheer anxious panic and said that yeah, he was. The second the guy reached out to pet him, though, my dog snarled and snapped at his hand, which I had never seen him do before. I apologized, made some excuse I don't remember, and hurried away under the pretense of getting my vicious dog away from him. Turns out this dude was a rapist who assaulted 3 other neighborhood kids in those trees, and my dog was probably the only reason I wasn't the 4th. When I was in university, I was walking home from the bars in the Bywood Market in Ottawa with my roommate at the time. It was about 2:30 a.m. and we were looking forward to getting home and ordering some pizza when we came across 2 guys and a very drunk girl. Initially we didn't think anything about it because it was a pretty common sight on a Friday, but as we walked behind them for a few minutes we noticed how out of it she was. One of the guys was essentially carrying her, and her clutch was loosely dangling from her limp wrist. Our street came up, but instead of turning down it we decided to see what was going on. The guys explained that she was one of their girlfriends and had too much to drink, so they were taking her home. We asked them a few more questions: what bar they were at, where she lived, if she was an Ottawa U student, etc. They gave pretty convincing answers, but all the same seemed really uncomfortable and wanted us to go away. During the conversation, the guy holding his girlfriend shifted her position to get a better grip, which caused her arm to dangle down and drop her clutch. Before they could move, my roommate grabbed the clutch and took out her ID. My roommate then asked if they knew her first and last name along with her birthday. This is where things changed. The other guy got really aggressive and confrontational while the other went silent. They didn't know her name or birthday. I then pulled out my phone and called police. The guy dropped her and they took off running. We waited with her for about 10 minutes until the police and EMS got there. We gave a statement but did not have much to go on other than their descriptions. Police told us they suspected she had been dosed, and that she was lucky we happened to be walking behind her. Pretty scary stuff. Update: thanks for all the kind words and my first ever gold. It was a pretty surreal experience, but I would like to think that most people would have acted the same way. Got off the subway at night. There was one other person about half a block behind me on my route home. This is a totally normal thing, has happened thousands of times. Totally normal looking dude, not even following me closely. I had a bad feeling. Such a bad feeling that, when I turned the corner on my way home, I broke into a dead sprint and hid behind a dumpster in the shadows partway down the street. By the time he came around the corner, I was well hidden, and could see him from my hiding place. As soon as I saw his reaction to the fact that I wasn't there, I knew I had been right to hide. He started looking for me, muttering to himself. He went up and down the street, looked around corners. I hid and held my breath until he was gone. It was terrifying. I am so glad I had that sudden, inexplicable impulse to hide, and listen to it. I don't know if this qualifies. I pulled up to a stoplight and waited for the light. Car pulls up behind me. Down the street to my left comes a car speeding but not insane. Light turned green for me. Something about the car told me to stay put. Stayed put. Car behind me kept honking and honking and honking. Car to my left ran the red. Then I pulled out and made a left. Got to the next stoplight and heard incessant honking. Turned around and saw the car that was behind me in the next lane motioning to roll down my window. He said, "That car wouldn't have hit you, it would have T-boned me. You saved my life. Listen to your inner self." Not me but my mom. When I was about 10 years old I got invited to spend the night at my really good friend's home. My mom said no. I begged her to let me go, but she was adamant that I couldn't. She said she just didn't feel right about it and that no amount of pleading was going to change her mind. A few weeks later my friend's dad was arrested for child pornography. After he went to trial it was found that he had also molested several young girls. He would have his daughter invite them over for a slumber party and then touch them when they went to sleep. If my mom hadn't trusted her gut feeling, I could have been one of his victims. Not me, but my mom, and I am doing my best to recall the story she mentioned to me a few months ago. My mom has been a psych nurse for over 30 years at a private hospital. One of the patients she was looking after was a very boisterous person in her 40s, and she had been in the hospital for over a week. One night mom noticed this lady was very lethargic, saying that she was just feeling tired and was going to have an early night and to get her meds early. This isn't going where you expect. Mom thinks this is very odd for this lady, but everyone has off days, and so she gives this lady her medication and she goes off to bed. About 5 minutes passes and mom still has a knot in her gut about this lady, and thinks she will just check her stats, so she goes to her room, where the lady is just about to lay down and checks her blood pressure, pulse and oxygen saturation. This is pretty rarely done in a psych hospital unless people have other health concerns needing monitoring. This lady's oxygen saturation was down to around 80%, I believe, doing the best to recall. To put it in perspective, if it falls below 92%, your cells can't absorb oxygen and this can cause permanent damage. Mom, in her over 40 years of nursing, wasn't always a psych nurse, has never seen someone with such a low level. She checks again and the same result. Mom calls an ambulance and gets this lady on oxygen. Later that night mom gets a call from the hospital the patient was sent to, from the doctor, who lets mom know that the lady is fine. She had a blood clot. If she had been left for another 15 minutes, the doctor is certain she would have died. The lady made a full recovery and gave mom a beautiful scarf the next time she saw her. Edit: I just checked and I was very wrong with the 80%. It had dropped to 33%. I have two. When I was 5, my late grandma was staying with us. One night I woke up to some noise and find my parents and grandma up. She told me to be quiet and I realized that there is someone trying to pick the lock on our flat's door. While this is happening, my father was loading his shotgun and telling my mother to keep us away from the door. Then he opened the door suddenly and hit the guy with the stock of the shotgun. He started to run and my father after him, but he got away. Later that night I learned that my grandma couldn't sleep, feeling there is something wrong, and after a while she heard what's going on with the door and woke my parents. And when I was in high school she had a stroke and lose the ability to speak. Because she was illiterate, it was hard for us to understand what she was trying to say. One day I went to school after preparing her breakfast as usual. When I arrived there was this urge telling me to go back to home. I tried to pass it as boredom, but it got to a point I felt very agitated and told my friends I'm going back home and left. When I was walking back home I found my grandma wandering around without anyone. I asked her what she is doing. She pointed out like she is out for a walk, but I knew back then she couldn't find her way back without anyone with her because of the stroke. So I walked with her for a while and we turned back to house to a very worried parents. This was before cell phones. I never believed in supernatural. I'm not a religious person, but I experienced this. I don't know what to call it. I hope she is in a good place with my parents. My oldest daughter, 30-something, stopped by my work one day and introduced her new boyfriend. He seemed a little off to me, but I decided it was just a guy dating my daughter and let it go. Later, he met my wife and I, and she told me later that he seemed off to her, too. She has pretty good instincts about people, so we decided to investigate him a bit. Typing his whole name into Google, the first result was a mug shot from a couple of years ago. The third was an active warrant. More searching resulted in finding 3 warrants from different counties, an extensive record, check deception, theft, driving while suspended, driving after a lifetime suspension, and driving while a habitual traffic offender, and a brand new marriage license for him and my daughter. They were going to get married later that week. We, of course, told her about him, but she insisted that he'd already told her about all of that and had taken care of it. We emailed links to her roommate, who showed her, but she didn't have any luck talking her out of the relationship. They were in love, and everything would work out okay in the end. We sent in an anonymous tip, and he was arrested the next day at her apartment. My daughter then found out that he'd been lying to her about pretty much everything. He had entangled her in a business he was trying to start that mostly involved her financing things for him, because his credit was trashed due to records for bounced checks and theft. She's still working to untangle herself from that. He is still in jail, and, according to her lawyer, will be for at least 2 years depending on what happens in 2 other counties. Posted before but. When I was doing my PhD, I got offered the chance to go to the Central European University Summer School program to do a course that would have been extremely valuable. I even got offered a full scholarship to do the course, and free accommodation, etc. A really amazing deal. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave, I said to my boyfriend at the time, "Something is telling me I shouldn't go." And I was like, WTF brain, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. But the "don't go" feeling kept getting stronger. So I withdrew from the course, feeling stupid for doing it. The day after I was scheduled to leave, my perfectly healthy mom got sick. A week later she was in a coma, a week later we had to turn off life support. Her funeral was a week after that. I would have been away in her last waking moments. At a research institute I walked into a mouse procedure/surgery room for a quick moment to grab something and leave. After walking out I felt, well, to be honest, like I was a little high. There were 3 other people in that room, including 2 undergraduates, so I got worried and went back inside to check things out. When I got back inside I asked if they were feeling okay. One of the undergrads turned to me and said she was fine, but was flushed and looked a little out of it. So I went around to all the isoflurane chambers, odorless volatile liquid that KOs mammals at low doses and kills them at higher, looking for leaks. Sure enough, the gasket at the bottom of one of the chambers had failed and it was leaking out and immediately boiling into a gas, and filling the room. I told them their isoflurane was leaking, and the postdoc told me they were fine and that he uses that machine all the time. He also pointed out that the isoflurane was in an air-curtained biosafety cabinet, and so even with the leak they were protected. I called him an idiot, because a biosafety cabinet recirculates air and doesn't evacuate it like a fume hood, which is what he should have been using. So I ignored him, propped open the door, and ordered the undergrads to get out of the room. I then went to their lab manager and told her what I had found. Their lab manager came down like the wrath of God, smiley face. TLDR, recreational drug usage taught me to recognize anesthesia leaks. I work at a psych hospital. I was in the cafe with an adult unit and the adolescent unit was also there. I had known one of the kids from when she was on the children's, and normally we had a good rapport. I went to say hi and told her I was proud she had been staying out of trouble. A few of the other girls reacted weirdly to me saying it and the girl looked guilty. I told the staff on the unit and said they should keep an extra eye on the girls because I had bad vibes about it. The staff kinda brushed me off. A half hour later 4 girls, including the one I knew, literally almost killed the 2 staff. One got her head bashed in and suffered brain trauma, and the other staff was blinded in one eye. This was something like 12 years ago. I was around 15 years old. My dad and uncles often chop down trees to cut and sell. Not a native, so I don't know the correct terminology. Basically they make firewood to sell. None of them does this for a living, they all have other jobs, but since my grandfather did this his whole life, they all know how to do it, and since my family owns some land, they kinda maintain my late granddad business at some capacity, working mainly at weekends, and it works something like an hobby they all enjoy and get some money out of it. All this to say, that even though they know what to do, they are not experts or respect every safety measure. So me and a cousin were with them on the woods one Saturday. She is 1 year younger than me, and my dad and uncles were just getting ready to chop down a huge eucalyptus. They tied the tree with ropes and were cutting it to fall down where near the road, where they had the trucks nearby, to carry it after cutting it in pieces. They told me and my cousin to go furthest into the wood, basically to the opposite side where the tree was going to land. They were about to do it and I can't explain, but I was getting the sensation of, the tree is going to land on us. I started to move and told my cousin to follow. She tells me no, she wants to see the tree getting cut. We start to hear the noises of the chainsaws. They have started it. I tell her I feel the tree is going to hit us. A debate starts and she basically refuses to leave, that her dad told us to be there and they know what to do, don't be such a pussy. I leave her there and go further away, since I can't shake the feeling that the tree is going to land on that spot. I then decide to come back because I was so sure my cousin was going to get hurt and the only thing I can think of is stealing her cap to piss her off and she might move. I proceed to do it, it works and she starts to chase me. After less than a minute the tree fells right on the spot we were before. The fucking tree landed the opposite side where my dad and uncles intended to. We then start to hear them screaming because they thought we were hit by it. They come running and saw us both paralyzed, me with an hand still holding her cap. Basically what happened was, the two ropes broke and the wind was pushing in our direction, and even with the tree being cut towards the other way, it still felt wrong. My dad was almost hit by it as well, since they weren't expecting it. I can't explain it, I don't believe in signs or anything supernatural. I also don't know shit about cutting trees and TBH I don't remember noticing the wind as well. I just felt something in my gut that we weren't safe. The good part is, me and that cousin have a love-hate relationship and every time I am about to lose an argument I go, shut up, I saved your life, and sometimes, it works. One night, I was about 8, I was hanging out with a bunch of high schoolers for some reason and we were playing manhunt. My team went into the woods to hide where we found a spot to wait for a while when we heard a noise that we just dismissed and left. We went back to the edge of the woods to scope out the area. One of the kids told me to wait there so I did. About 5 minutes later I had this bad feeling so I just left. The next day I went back to that same spot in the woods with my friend to show him. I heard the same noise I heard the night before with the other kids but again didn't think much of it. We soon got out and started to head home. We were probably 50 feet away from where we had exited the woods when I looked back at my friend. A man emerged from the spot that we had. I yelled back to him to run and when we got to a safe distance I turned back to the man and we just locked eyes for a good minute when he started to approach us so we ran home. I'm 17 now and think back on it, I always wonder what would have happened if I stayed in the woods by myself that night before.